everybody. I wanted to take a little bit of time and talk a little bit about the situation in Iran. I know that I don't really typically do a lot of these international relations type videos, and I kind of think that's a little bit of a disservice. It's something that I have a lot of interest in, I have a lot of opinions on, and I'm not the most experienced or most knowledgeable person on these things, but I'm certainly way more qualified to have an opinion and to discuss that opinion than, say, somebody like Dave Smith. Not to get too much into the controversy from 2 months ago, but I just, I have put a lot of thought and effort into this over the past 25 years specifically. And so it seemed to me that maybe I could reach out and kind of put some stuff out there. I know I'm coming at it a little bit late, and I do apologize for that. I did mean to get this out before the actual initial American strikes happened. Basically, after Israel did their due, I wanted to come in and kind of give this little presentation. And what I want to talk about a couple of things. One, I want to talk about Iran, the country and the people and the history, especially from '79 to today. That's something that's really important to me. It's something that I have spent a lot of time studying. And while I'm by no means an expert, I do think that I have some stuff that I can address when it comes to that, and maybe shed a little bit of light onto what's going on there, who the Iranian people are, and what we can look forward to, hopefully, as this situation progresses. Then I want to talk about Iran's nuclear program, and specifically the nuclear program as it relates to United States foreign interests and the relationship that we've had with the current Iranian regime, and kind of where does that go? And then the third thing that I want to talk about is essentially where do we go from here? Now, as of a few minutes ago, I believe I saw that the president, that is President Donald J. Trump, has truthed. I don't even know, is that a verb? Whatever. I saw it on X, that there has been a ceasefire between Iran and Israel. I'm kind of assuming that we're in that as well, and that is really good news. But let's go back to Iran as it is as a nation from 1979 on. So obviously, if you've read Advance to Contact, it does begin with the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And this was a real interesting time in just kind of the world as democratization was starting to really spread, and that was part of Carter and Brezhnev, my goodness, Carter and Brzezinski's foreign policy push was kind of to spread democratization, and the idea, as naive as it was to sort of take a step back from our heavy-handed dealings with anti-communist but not democratic regimes. So if we take South Korea as an example, if we take Nicaragua as an example, we were basically stepping back and saying, okay, it's no longer appropriate for us to have relations with these sons of bitches just because there are sons of bitches and just because they are against the communists. And what that ultimately led to in Nicaragua, of course, was the overthrow of the Somoza regime and the rise of the Sandinista. And the Sandinista, of course, were communists, and they pretty much failed at governing, but it's kind of hard to say in Latin America because with corruption down there, I mean, almost everybody, actually everybody ends up ultimately failing, and you end up with a bunch of failed states. But let's keep this in the context of Iran. And during the revolution in '79, Iran was going through a transition, and it was the goal, and I wouldn't say it was really voluntary, but the goal of the Shah was to transition into a parliamentary position, and that's why he had his personal preference was for the prime minister, a cat named Bakhtiar, to take over and lead a secular government going forward. So the Shah was going to be out of the picture no matter what. But this the Shah leaving, even, and I mean, let's face it, he was not a popular leader, especially at the time he was left. He was getting chased out of town. I'm not romanticizing the reign of the Shah at all. And his secret police, I mean, he had a lot of reasons that he needed to just get the hell out of there and needed to be replaced. And he was hoping to transition them into sort of a parliamentary democracy, a representative government. And unfortunately, as he was being chased out, Bakhtiar tried to rein in the secret police. He tried to sort of start reform movements. Unfortunately, the Ayatollah Khomeini, who would, and I apologize, man. I'm a Russian translator. I'm a Slav by heritage. These names, these Persian names, just I can't figure them out. But Khomeini presented a lot of the populace, and it's one of those things where he was able to get a hardcore group to support him and his theocracy, his Muslim governance, this Islamic fundamentalist regime. He was able to present that as kind of the way forward. And so all of the other, there aren't that many die-hard parliamentarians that are just going to go to the mattresses and just die because of how much they believe in representative government. When you're doing a transition into trying to get into that representative government space, you really need to have kind of you can't fight against something like what Khomeini was bringing, which was, that hardcore major appeal, especially to men of fighting age. It was really bringing a lot in that overpowered, and there's more to it obviously than just the ideology. But long story short, too late. The Islamists throw out the parliamentarians with the Shah, everybody, and they essentially take over with what is essentially an autocratic government. And it always bothers me because, especially in the post-Cold War, pre-9/11 timeframe, I really, really, really thought that Iran was going to be the next groundswell of popular support for representative government. Okay, we had just watched the reunification of Germany. We had just watched the collapse of the Soviet Union. They were having elections in all of the former Soviet countries, and so as an observer, as a student at the time, I was looking at, okay, the Middle East. Where is a place that democracy can flourish? And you look at, say, Iraq versus Iran. There's just, two easy ones. Saudi Arabia would actually be a better example for the purposes of this discussion. But let's just take Iraq because that's the one that we really got to know. Okay. In Iraq, actually, let me back it up a little bit. In order to transition into a representative government, a democracy, let's just use the term democracy as a code word, a cheat word for representative government. In order to transition to democracy, there are a ton of different factors that really need to be considered. But to my mind and in my studies, the three that I focus on the most are, number one, a homogeneous population. So you need a population that identifies as being a singular population. We are the people of the United States of America. We are the people of Iraq. We are the people of Iran. Okay? You need that homogeneous population. That's number one. Number two was the existing of, the number two is a certain level of gross domestic product. You need a GDP that hits within a certain threshold. I don't recall what that threshold was. I'm sure it's updated over the course of the last 25 years. But there is basically the poorest countries will not have the ability to make this transition to a representative government. And then the third thing, and this one is really important for this region, and that is a strong middle class. That is, you cannot have a high GDP with all of the money concentrated with the wealthy and none of the money concentrated in the middle there. So you basically have the hyper rich and the super poor. And for most of my readers, when you hear that, you're probably starting to think of a few regions. I know that if there are any lefties reading this or watching this video, they're going to be like, well, that's the income equality difference in the United States of America, and that's why it's all so unfair. No, you guys don't even know what you're talking about. I will concede that income inequality leads to instability and that it's definitely something that we need to look into. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about levels of income equality that we haven't seen in the United States of America since our inception. So wash your brains out when it comes to that if you're particularly left of center and think that we've got a real problem here. We have a problem. It's nothing like what we're looking at. In fact, let's just go ahead and say it. Saudi Arabia. I brought them up earlier when we were talking about the different democratization scenarios in the Middle East. They are one of those countries that has a very high GDP, and that is because their GDP is almost solely based on fossil fuels. It's the petroleum industry. I understand that they're trying to transition away from that, and that's just looking to the future when everybody is going to be moving away from fossil fuels, whether it's because of the environment, whether it's because of scarcity, or whether it's just because we can do it cheaper in other ways, whether it be nuclear, or possibly if we use nuclear. To generate domestic power, to generate base load power for electricity generation, to charge the batteries for all those electric cars that we think we need. But the point is, because petroleum is their main source of income, all of that petroleum wealth is concentrated just within that cabal that's at the top of Saudi Arabian society. So that's going to always be a problem for the Saudis to achieve anything like a representative government. And don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that that's why they're trying to diversify their portfolio, their income, that's not it. They're doing it basically because they recognize that the value of their current one asset is going to continuously go down, and that they need options if they want to survive as a nation state going forward. Okay, all of that is just to kind of put in the back of your mind. Now let's talk about how Iran falls into these particular scenarios versus Iraq. Okay, so let's take number one, homogeneous population. This was the big red alert that I had when we decided to invade Iraq in 2003. Now, I want to make sure that we understand I'm talking very specifically about invading Iraq with the understanding or the belief that we could introduce democracy into that nation. I was skeptical largely because of that lack of homogeneous populations. And what am I saying? What am I talking about here? Iraq, and I think most of my readers probably understand this, but Iraq is not a naturally formed country. It is not a unified country of peoples that have lived there for millennia. It is a country that was more or less arbitrarily created with the end of the First World War and the fall of the British Empire after the Second World War. So what is Iraq? Iraq is mostly Sunni Arabs. Okay, so you have this large area that's Sunni Arabs, but you also have a Kurdish population, and the Kurds are different than the Arabs. They are a totally different ethnicity with a totally different history. And then on top of that, you have the Shia Arabs. Now, these are the Arabs that are closer, like in the north, that are closer to the border with Iran. And that is a religious difference from the main group, the Shia. And I'm sorry, my goodness. Let me just state this out so we can not be as confused. I understand the differences, but sometimes when you're talking, you just kind of stumble. The primary religious group within the borders of Iraq are the Sunni Muslims, okay? Then there is a minority in the north, over by closer to where the border with Iran is, that are Shia. and that is the predominant religion within Iran. And it's an offshoot of Islam. It basically breaks down to, after the Prophet Muhammad died, there was a schism within the Muslim faith that over who was going to take over as the next leader of the faith. And I can't get into the specifics of it. It's not my area of expertise, but that's the cause of the schism. And so, that basically gives both sides looking at each other with a lot of suspicion and not as much cooperation as you might expect. Okay, so you have religious divides, you have ethnic divides, and the only thing that makes Iraqis Iraqi was a guy like Saddam Hussein holding them together under brute force, gassing the Kurds when they got out of line, crushing the Shia when they got out of line. And there were no two ways about that. They didn't come together, on their own, happy, just, happenstance. They were forced together, and they were held together by a strong man. If you want a European analog to this, then take Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was a country made up of a bunch of smaller countries, a bunch of different ethnicities, different religions, and they were all held together by a strong man, a guy named Tito, probably heard of him. So long as there was a Soviet empire, they were able to kind of keep that together, even if there was ethnic strife. But as soon as the Soviets collapsed, and we literally have a term for it now called balkanization. They broke into a bunch of smaller countries. I have maintained since the 2010s that we should have allowed Iraq to go through a similar process where the Kurds and the Shia and the Sunni basically fight each other until they get their own little kingdoms, and then we can deal with each one as an individual nation. Of course, we can't do that because for some inexplicable reason, even 25 years later, Turkey is still somehow in NATO. And don't get me started on that. You guys don't want me to go down the NATO rabbit hole. We're talking about Iran today. Okay, so that's homogeneous population in Iraq doesn't exist. In Iran, they are Persians. They are a people that go back into antiquity. We know of the Persians from the Bible. We know of, I'm just saying personally as a Judeo-Christian, I know of the Persians from the Bible. They go back. They have inhabited this land that entire time. I mean, you talk about the Persians fighting the Greeks back in that classical era. They've been there, and they are a people, and they identify as a people. They are almost universally Shia Muslim. And so they have a religious connectivity, they have an ethnic connectivity, and a nationalist connectivity. That is very solid. During the 2000s, they had a very strong middle class, and they definitely had a GDP when they were, with their oil economy. They definitely had the GDP that would get them, that threshold that would get them, over the hump. They had everything that they would need to create a democratic government. And then this is the part that kills me the most, is that when the Ayatollah and the hardliners took over, they more or less, and somebody might crucify me for this one, but it's there. They more or less modeled their government in a very, very similar fashion to our government. In fact, they do have three tenths of government, 3 seats of government. They have an executive, they have a legislature, and they have a judicial. And they do have a separation of powers. But there's one radical difference, and that is that their Supreme Court is actually their religious court, and the Supreme Court has veto power over everything else. So no matter what happens with the executive and the legislative, the Supreme Court, their imams, I'm sure there's a better term for it, but the head of their religious court was able to just say, actually, this is what we're going to do, and that's what they would do. And it drove us crazy in the early aughts because we were looking at, very moderate presidents that were elected as the executive. And we were just like, yes, here come the moderate Iranians. It's going to happen. No, they would just get, they would just get put down because the Supreme Court. I mean, imagine if John Roberts got to essentially tell the president to pound sand. I mean, we're kind of looking at some of that now with these federal judges, but imagine if John Roberts, through the Constitution of the United States of America, got to say yes or no to anything that the president or the legislature came up with. That's essentially what they're dealing with. So they have within them the structures of government with some tweaking where they could have a very similar, government to what we have. Whether that's optimal or suboptimal, I'll leave to the the parliamentarians versus the federalists. Well, they can fight that battle. We're not going to do it on this. All we're saying is that they have the institutions that, with some tweaking, they could have a functioning representative government. And again, we kept thinking, yes, there's going to be a popular uprising. If they're going to go too far, and there's going to be a popular uprising. But something happened in 2003 that more or less ensured that there wasn't going to be a popular uprising, and that was the invasion of Iran. The invasion of Iraq. When we invaded Iraq, I do remember very specifically talking to a cohort of mine at a law firm I was working for at the time, and saying there's going to be a very bad downstream effect of this, and that is the Iranian mullahs are going to crack down on the moderates in Iran, and we can kiss the moderates goodbye. And she scoffed at me. She said, that's not something to worry about. That's not a thing that's going to happen. And then General Wesley Clark, she's a very big Democrat supporter. And then Wesley Clark came out and said exactly what I said. And like 2 weeks later, and she brought that article in, and I can't remember, I think it might have been Newsweek, but she brought the article in, and she's like, oh, look, this is so important. And I was like, lady, I just told you that. Anyway, point being that after 2003, the mullahs really cracked down on the moderates and stopped even paying lip service to the idea that they could have power. And we saw a conservative fundamentalist swing in the leadership of the executive and legislature at that point. And one of the reasons why they had originally let that go, like Khatami, let the moderates take power, was because they knew that at the end of the day, they would kind of keep the populace quiet with the promise of moderation, while at the same time, sorry, I've got this real bad cough. I'm surprised I made it 20 minutes before I had to stop. But anyway, so yeah, they let the moderates take charge, get power, because they knew, one, they could veto anything, and two, it would help quell the populace with the promise of moderation. 2003, the invasion of Iraq basically wiped that out. And now they just had kind of everybody was on the same side when it came to the executive, legislative, and the judicial. And we saw what the outcome of that was in 2009. I don't know if you guys remember this, but in 2009, there was a very big popular groundswell of anti-government sentiment. There were protests in the streets, and the Iranian government just went Tiananmen Square on them and just crushed them and put them right in their place. And that was the last we heard of moderates in Iran. And okay, so that's kind of where now that we're looking at what's going to happen next. And I know that's going to be a separate section, but as we look at how this is going to evolve, I hope that we can see a return of the Iranian moderates to take power now that the mullahs and the infrastructure, the military, now that so many things have been damaged and so much power has been decreased. I do hope that within, internally in Iran, there can be a groundswell, there can be an uprising, there can be pressure to get rid of these assholes that have been destroying the Persian people for the last 40 years. I mean, let's keep our fingers crossed on that. But that's basically Iran and where we're at to get us up to this point. It's Iran itself. Now, I do want to talk about the Iranian nuclear program, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and end this video and then start a new one.